Rabbi, we are going through a very difficult time period. We know that we've been in a war for almost a year. And yes, it looks like we are winning, but even when we win, we seem to be losing. We just lost this week 6 people that we know were shot at point blank, that people were davening for them very much. Amongst all the soldiers, which we can't forget, how many have fallen in this terribly difficult war. And you hear numbers, how many we've killed of them. The truth is, if you read about it, they recruit more as if there's no end to them. By them there's no numbers, and you sit and wonder, is there an end to this? Will there be an end to this, and what should we do in this situation? And more specifically, I want to ask something connected to the Parsha. Because in the Parsha it says interesting words. When the Kohen Gadol goes before war, here we are speaking in these Parshiyot about the idea of war, what we're so too familiar with. It says over here that the Shoter used to say to them, when the Kohen Gadol stood up, he used to say, Al yirach levavchem v'al tirau. Don't fear and don't have any intrepidation. Al teretzu mipneim ki Hashem Elokeichem ha'olech imechem lachem im oiveichem nashe'etchem. Because the Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to go with you, and He stands beside you. He stands beside you, and He will always be there to back you up. The simple understanding of these words is it's a haftacha, it's a promise that things are going to be okay. Whenever we step into war, whenever we step into battle, you're going to be okay. You're going to be fine. I'm going to protect you. And this is what the Kohen Kebiyachol is telling us before we go to war. Don't worry about it. I'm going to be behind you. The obvious question, which the Mefarshim already asked, what do you mean? We've lost a war before, and even if we haven't lost a war, how many people have died in the process? Here we are surrounded, like I said. Over 700 people have died in this war alone, besides the 1,200 that died on October 7th. We're hitting the numbers of almost 2,000 people here. And you're telling me, don't fear, don't worry about them, I'm taking care of you, everything's okay. It's a little bit strange. How do you understand this? So over here is a very important interpretation, which we understand, to understand all our wars and all the commitments that we've had in this country towards other nations. And let me just tell you 2 shitot, very important shitot, and from this we'll get a very clear picture of what it is. But I'll start with a story before I begin explaining these explanations. A true story that happened during the time of the Haskalah, during the time of the Enlightenment movement. The Maskilim did an interesting play, as they used to do, to make fun of the religious Jews. It was known as the Tzava HaIvri. It was called the Israeli army, the Hebrew army. And over there they got a group of about 200 people up on stage. And they had a Kohen, a person pretending to be a Kohen, stand up on stage. And he said, whoever inaugurated a house, he should return to his house. And a whole big group of soldiers went away. Then he said, who inaugurated a kerem, and a whole group of soldiers went away. Who got engaged to a woman, and a whole group of soldiers went away. Finally, there was approximately 100 people left on stage. It says, Mi arach levav, from our parsha, Mi arach levav, who is a fearful in heart, that is fear in his heart and is afraid of war and can't stand to see blood, etc. He should go away. Or, as we know, Chazal tell us, what it means is, who is a sinner, who is a person who has sins behind him and is afraid that he will not succeed in battle, as the Gemara in Sota tells us that was the kavanah. And in Makri, immediately everybody on stage left. They had everybody on stage disappear except for 2 people that stood there, the Chofetz Chaim and Rav Chaim Brisker. Those are the only 2 people that were still standing on stage, who were in fear of their sins. Everybody else went away, and that was it. And then they closed the curtains, and that was the end of the humorous act. That was their type of sense of humor, as they say, of this of stage. They told this whole story to Rav Chaim in order that he would be upset about what these Maskilim are doing, what these Tzedukim are doing. And he said, what's wrong with the story? Everything's 100% correct. The only thing that they didn't do is they closed the curtains too early. Because in essence, Rav Chaim and the Chofetz Chaim won the war. The 2 of these old people who were holding canes and a Gemara in their hand, that's how they concluded, were the ones who went out to war, and they're the ones who won the war. That's the only piece of information that they left out. Al Kopanim, this is an example of something that is connected to our Parsha, that is very connected to our Parsha, and that is, I have to say that I was in the middle of saying this piece right now, which I just clipped off, and while I was speaking about Mi'arach Levav, suddenly an incredible wasp just came onto my stender, and I ran for it. So we had to clip it from the scene. It was just too coincidental that I couldn't resist. Anyway, so there are two positions to be able to explain this idea of what the pshat in the pasuk is. The Rambam in the Sefer Mitzvahs, Lo Taseh Mitzvah Nun Chetz, and it's also in Hilchos Malachim, towards the end of Hilchos Malachim in Perek Zayin. Over there he writes in both places that the Pashup Pshat in the pasuk is a haftacha. It's not a haftacha. It's a tzivui. It's a command. It's a command telling us that it is asur to be afraid during battle. And he says, if you do, you're an avarian. You're over an isser. Doesn't matter what the position of the people are. You're not allowed to be in battle. Ad Kedei Kach, that he writes very explicitly there that if you do have fear and you do run out of fear, he says the damar beroshai, that you're responsible for the deaths that happen because you have to go b'chol liboy u'b'chol nafshay. And Demei Yisrael Tluyin B'tzavaroi. These are the words of the Rambam, very strong words. And he says, you're over a lav, the Kol Mishi Yasu Gachor, anyone who runs and flees from a war, he is over an Isser. That's the position of the Rambam. The Ramban over there disagrees in the Sefer Mitzvot, and he says, how can the Shotrim go ahead and warn them that whoever's afraid they should leave, if we know that's an avera? You're embarrassing them in public. You're telling them everyone who leaves is going to be embarrassed. You're telling them by being afraid they're over a lav, so now by being afraid they're leaving. Also, what are you telling me? If I'm afraid, then I don't have to go to war? So that means that if I do something wrong by being afraid, which is a lav, according to the Rambam, suddenly I'm getting credit for it. That's the words of the Ramban. Now the truth is, these questions are straightforward answered by the Rambam himself, because the Rambam himself writes, when are you over this? Or in war, not pre-war, before the war itself. It's before in the Rambam that you're not over. He says when you're in war, if you're in fear, then you can't. Then you're over an Isser, which means that you have a choice before the war to leave. In other words, if you take the option of yes going into war, then you're not allowed to fear. You're causing indignation. You're causing fear to occur and other people to flee because of your pachadim, because of how scared you are, and therefore you're not allowed to go to war in the first place. But not going is not an isser in and of itself. That's the words of the Rambam. And the Ramban and the Ravid disagree. They say it's not a mitzvah, it's not a tzivu, it's not a command, it's a haftacha. And this is what's important here. It's a promise, says the Ramban, that if you go to war, I'm going to take care of you. Now everybody asks, how can you make such a promise like that? It doesn't make any sense. HaKadosh Baruch Hu in these psukim are telling us that you're going to be okay. Like we said, look at what we've been going through until now. How can the psukim come, or the shoitrim and the shoftim and the Kohen Gadol come and tell us that you're going to be okay? That once you go, you're going to be fine. So this question is only a question on the Ramban, not on the Rambam, but it needs to be answered. And the Mefarshim on the Rambam say, so we see from here proof like the Rambam. It's a proof from the Rambam that it must be that he's correct, that it's a tzivur, it's an isser not to, but it's not necessarily a promise. So the answer is the Ramban over here is really leshitato, and this is the yisod that we have to know, that the Ramban writes this in many places, which we want to expand. That the Ramban writes in his Sefer Amunah B'Tachon that if a person is B'Tachon Gemura in a Kodesh Baruch Hu, if he knows that a Kodesh Baruch Hu is behind him, if he goes into something knowing that I'm with Hashem and he goes hand in hand with a Kodesh Baruch Hu, Muftach lo shelo yimtza nezek. And the Rambam himself writes this: V'lo tagiu ra yivne bayit banim v'yizke lo elam haba. He should know that it's okay. The Rambam himself writes that by doing it l'shem shamayim, he will be okay. If a person does it with proper indignation, with a proper commitment, then he's going to be okay. So we want to expand on this idea based on the words of the Stipler. The Stipler says an incredible thing here. Definitely, unfortunately, like we've seen, death happens in war, even as we say to the best of us. It happens to people, it's a gzera mina shamayim, and that's the way it happens. We see the Kohen goes and says that if you're scared you're going to die, go away and die. Pen yamut b'milchama. If a person built a house, got engaged to a woman, pen yamut b'milchama. We see that we're worried that he might die. We know that by David and Melech, that everybody used to give a get to their wife before they went out to war, just in case you won't be able to find the body, because we're worried that people might die. Yaakov Avinu was scared of his battle, Shema Yigro Machet, that he might die with Esav. And we know Yair ben Menashe in the war of Ai, in Yeshua, we spoke about it in the Navi Shurim. Over there also, someone died. Yes, people do die, unfortunately, in war, even to the best of us. That's the fact, that's what he's saying. But the Havtacha, the promise in the Parsha here, that is being referred to, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling us, is that a person has to go b'mesiras nefesh. He has to go l'kadosh Shem Shamayim. He has to know that even when he's going, that whatever situation happens to him, that he's doing it because he's doing Ratzon Hashem. Ki Hashem Elokeichem ha'olech imachem. And whatever situation that happens. And the Stipler says even more than that. He says that when a person goes in, and to have basic fear is okay. We all have fears. You can't tell someone not to have fears. But there's a very subtle difference here. Sometimes a person has fear because you're pashut scared, because you're scared of war. Okay, so that's a situation that unfortunately happens to the best of us, and there's not much to do, and it's not the Isser that the Rambam was referring to. What it's referring to is when a person goes and sees, wow, they're bigger than us, they're stronger than us, they're unbeatable. The more we kill, the more they come out. These guys are mamish like cockroaches, these Hamasnikim. The more you kill, just the more of them come out from all the corners. Anything you do, you can't. It just seems like a not unbeatable situation. In all those situations, that's an Isser. That's similar to the Meraglim. The Meraglim said, oh, they're just too big. They were right, they're big, but that has nothing to do with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. When you come with the B'Shem Hashem Yikra, then there's nothing more to fear about. And if you look in the Pesukim, that's exactly what the Pesukim say. Ki Hashem Hashem Elokeichem Olech Imachem Ki Tetzeh L'Milchama V'Re'ita Sus V'Rechev Am Rav Mimcha Lo Yitira Mehem Ki Hashem Elokeichem Imcha. All the Shofet is coming is to teach us a lesson which we already know. I know there are many bitachon shirim that go around over here, especially in Torah anytime. But over here, this is the message that the Shofet is coming to tell us, that the Kohen is coming to tell you, that Hashem Elokeichem Itchem, Lo Yitira Mehem, Lo Yitifach. It doesn't matter how big they are, because in front of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, there's no difference whether they're big or small. That's the Nakud of bitachon that he's encouraging. And yes, something might happen. Lo Aleinu V'Lo Echem Bar Minan. We don't want anything to happen. But the Nakud he's saying is, when you go, don't be scared of that situation, because that has nothing to do with anything. But often TV, we are above Teva. We are above the natural phenomenon. We've always gone the 9 yards. Nothing has ever been too hard for us. We live in this country right now 80 years in absolute and subtle miracles. Even the biggest of chilonim, I don't even the most extreme of leftists will agree that we're living here in a miracle, so to speak. That we can't be living here in any type of natural phenomenon. And that's the Isser of a person during the time of war, when he's out in the war, to have fear. The fear is of not fearing of koichem ve'oitim yadam. Don't worry about how good you are compared to how strong they are. Don't worry about their tanks or anything that has to do with them. You should know that that's coming. That's what Rabbeinu Yonah says. In Shari Chubi writes this. The Rabbeinu B'chaim Kad V'Kemach. This is a repetitive yisod which is being told to us over and over again. And this is the chizik that they were told before the Milchama. Al yirach lebavchem, don't have fear in your heart because of what you see in front of your face. I understand in a situation of war there's blood all over you and things are not pretty, so a person has fear. That's not where we're going. But ki Hashem Elokeichem alechem elchem leilachem lachem im oiveichem le'yoshiatchem. You should know that no matter what stands in front of us, how big this monster stands in front of us and how evil they are, you should know that a Kadosh Baruch Hu is behind it. It's Gzeira Gazer Lefanai, and I'm taking care of you. That was really the sin of the Meraglim, so to speak. That their whole sin was, yes, they were bigger, but who cares? My nafkamina, what difference does it make? If you know that you're fighting Milchamos Hashem, and you come with a bitachon and a mesiras nefesh l'kadosh Shem Shamayim to do the Ratzon Hashem, so Mamela, there's nothing more to be scared about. There's nothing to be scared about if they're bigger, if I'm bigger, if their tanks are better, if their technology is better or not, if they have Russia behind them, if Iran is loaded with a crazy amount of money, with unlimited amount of weapons because they just have unlimited amount of money. Basically, they're a bottomless pit that spends it all on terrorism and nothing to do with their citizens. So yeah, the situation looks a little bit scary, but there's nothing to be scared about. Because we know that the Kadosh Baruch Hu is there. Hashem yilachem lachem ve'atem tachrishum. We are quiet, and the Kadosh Baruch Hu takes care of us. It's happened over and over again. Look what happened in the Gulf War over there. We weren't even allowed to fight. That was the most extreme of examples. Over there during the Gulf War, it wasn't just that. That was the best example because we weren't allowed to fight. We were told, stay quiet, stay put, don't do anything. And we were just hurtled on us, missile after missile after missile. And I was here during a certain amount of a period of that time period when Hussein was doing all these funny things. And over there we see, V'atem tachrishun. You see that Kadosh Baruch was protecting us even without all our efforts, without all our personal fights that we do on ourselves. Ki pachad, as the Rabbi Genish writes, Ki pachadati v'yateni v'asher yugolti yavolei. Even with all my fears that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will come after me, He will take care of me. He will be able to do, and that's really the whole tafkid of what the Kohen was warning here, and that's the pshat in these Avtachot and the Psukim, and that really is the biggest idud, if I could say, the biggest encouragement that we have in our time, in our day and age during this year, that we should know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has been fighting our wars. We see He's protecting us left and right from all the unfortunate situation that we're surrounded by. And yes, even though we're hearing about tragedies ad ein sfor, which is incredibly difficult to swallow, and you would think that we would have won, and we were waiting for, as it always ends in the movies, the good guys win and the bad guys die, and that's the way it's supposed to be, and that's the way it should be, and that's the way it will be in the end of the day. But at the end we know that it's all the gzeira of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And with this I end with a story. It's a story that took place in 1996 by a kid by the name of Cheski Honing, that he unfortunately had a stroke of leukemia that came over him at the young age of 13 years old, right after his bar mitzvah had happened. He had it when he was a child, and it relapsed, and it came back to him at the age of 13 years old. In the whole city of Michigan where they lived, where the Honing family lived, over there, they were all saying Tehillim for him day after day, month after month, while he was in the hospital. But his situation was looking bleak. It wasn't doing very well, until someone came to the father of this Cheski, and he told him, you should know that your kid is going to be okay. Your son's going to be, it wasn't a rabbinical figure, it was a friend of his from Shul, and said, your son will be okay. Why? Because we have a pasuk, Eilu berechev ve'eilu besusin ve'anachnu b'shem Elokeinu nazkir, and we will call out in the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They call out in the names of their tanks, of their horses, of their planes, but we are always call out in the Shem Hashem Elokeichem nazkir. We're above teva, we're above nature. We're going to be okay. Everything's going to be fine. We deal always with different rules, and therefore your kid's going to be okay. A promise from his friend. It was hard for him to swallow, but after a little while he felt encouraged. He felt a certain amount of simcha, a certain amount of happiness from the backup words from these encouraging words that his friend told him. And you know what? He was really encouraged when he saw his son Cheski, after a bone marrow transplant that took place approximately a month after that, was actually working. The bone marrow transplant was working. His situation was getting better. And he was very encouraged, and he always repeated these words, until after 2.5 months, things began to complicate. The complications started kicking in. The situation looked bleak. It didn't look like things were going to work out until in November of 1997, approximately a year and a half after he was diagnosed with leukemia, Cheski ended up passing away at his age of 14 years old. It's a very sad story. Many thousands of people came to the Levaya. They were very difficult to spade him because he was a very sweet boy. And you understand, it wasn't an easy situation. And the father, especially after having his strong streak of hope, ended up feeling very haunted by this whole situation. It bothered him. He kept repeating the words to himself. But what's with the pasuk? What's with David HaMelech? What did he mean, David HaMelech? I don't understand it. It was okay. Until he finally came out with a beautiful pshat. A pshat with actually some of the Mefarshim say over there, that it wasn't referring to during the war. During the war that they're Eilu Berech Level Susim, it's talking about after the war. After the completion of the war. When one side loses, whether it's the good side or the bad side, when one side realizes that it's not there, there's a big difference between the impositions of both sides. They start blaming their maneuvers, the information. Why didn't the Secret Service give us better information about this? What they call the Mechdal of October 7th, which means the disappointment, the mistake, the falteration of course, the governmental falteration that messed up on October 7th. All of that was how this all happened. This whole year happened to us because of this big mistake that should have never happened. It should have never happened if they just gave better information, if they just got on the scene a little bit quicker. Things would have been a little bit difficult. These are the ones who are busy blaming the chariots, and they're the ones busy blaming the horses. They're forgetting the end of the pasuk. B'Shem Hashem Elokeinu nazkir. But we don't work that way. We work very different. We know when things happen, whether it looks good or whether it looks bad, and of course we know it's all bitter, but it's not bad. It might be bitter, but it's not bad, as Chofetz Chaim said. We are always b'Shem Hashem Elokeinu Naskir. We know that it's a Gzera Min Hashamayim. We know that it's a Kadosh Baruch Hu doing us, and we have to do what we have to do b'Mesiras Nefesh, to do the right things from a Kadosh Baruch Hu. But we always know that it's a message being sent to us from a Kadosh Baruch Hu. There's no disappointments. There's achsavot, we're very, it's upsetting to us, but we know that even with the things that occur, that we know it's a direct message from a Kadosh Baruch Hu, and that's pshat in the pasuk. Hey makaru v'nafalu, hey makaru v'nafalu. They slumped over and they bent over, and they have a very difficult time after the war, and they're depressed, and they sit with protests. As I'm sitting here in Eretz Yisrael and hear protests, you can't drive anywhere here. They're closing down hospitals out of protest because they're upset at Netanyahu. It's his fault, as if he's holding the hostages in some Israeli jail and hasn't let them out yet. If they would just realize that it would be B'Shem Hashem Elokeinu Naskir, so then they would be on a different statue. Anachnu kamnu v'nitodad. We're the ones who are able to get arisen. We're the ones who are able to get invigorated. We're the ones who know that it comes with the message, and we have to do something about it. Here we are before Elul. We're ready to hear about a Rosh Hashana, which won't be a similar Rosh Hashana that it was last year for us. But anachnu kamnu v'nitodad. We know to be able to get up and take the message from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yes, and it could be we in a status of loss. Baruch Hashem, we're doing pretty well, but we know that okay, they're going ahead and refurbishing their amount of terrorists and continuously doing. We just lost 3 policemen yesterday, shoiftim v'shoitrim from the shotrim in the parsha of shotrim and the parsha of policemen. We just lost 3 policemen yesterday in a horrible terrorist attack. And we just found out about 6 hostages that were killed at point blank just recently as a point of negativity. But we have to never give up. We have to be able to know that Shem Hashem Nikra. And unfortunately, if we fall to the fall of what the leftists are doing, because they're too busy with their susim ve'rechavim, they're too busy with that, then we will never be able to win, because they will just go protest after protest. They don't have a Gemara to turn to. They don't have a Sefer Torah to look at. So all they have to do is take to the streets, to go ahead and wave signs, burn, literally making bonfires, hitting policemen and causing the havoc that they do. And we should at least take that lesson for us, because they're not learning the lesson that what happened a year ago when they put down a whole Yom Kippur event that happened. There was a Yom Kippur event that happened on Dizengoff, and they went ahead and they ransacked the place in order to say that we have no public shuls in Tel Aviv. We don't want to have that. They didn't take the message, because they're doing it once again, because they are busy just pointing out that it's all because of a person, because of a thing, because of because of a happenstance that happened. But we have to go ahead and take the message that we are learning from our parsha, but the shoftim and the shotrim are screaming to us to come and tell us that it's all from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ve'anachnu kamnu v'nitodad. Shabbat shalom.